This is Steph with Americans for Safe Access. I was getting a lot of calls about what was happening as far as the next steps of the rescheduling. So I thought it would just be easier to have a presentation and bring on one of my favorite colleagues, one of the most ethical not only business women in this space, but also someone who really spends a lot of time deep diving in regulations and legislations. So Pam, I know we pulled you off Capitol Hill, so thank you so much for joining us and helping us unpack this.
Oh,
Really
it's such
appreciate
a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Steph. And I'm excited to talk about really what this means for patients and medical marijuana, which is near and dear to my heart. I am a medical patient first.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So with just I'm ready to be going. I'm going to take us from the presentation. Let's see if the video is working now. Yeah, for some reason there was something weird about our video, so I don't know if you're going to be able to see our face today. But don't worry, we've got lots of great pictures, so that'll be fun. But so I'm just going to be kind of going through this presentation and pausing, and Pam and I are going to be discussing some of these items. Pam and I got the filing yesterday around 4, and so I didn't really sleep last night reading a lovely, 90 pages of text, trying to unpack what this means. And so, I'm doing the best I can to just kind of unpack what was in that document, and then we'll talk about sort of what are the next steps. And so I'll just go ahead and get started. And Pam, as I'm going through these, I know we were on the phone for all wee hours of the night last night, but just feel free to jump in to add comment. Okay, and again, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so what happened yesterday, and I haven't seen it on the Federal Registry yet, but the Department of Justice put out a press release right after Biden made some comments about supporting the Schedule 3, that they were, ready to post their findings to the Federal Registry. And so I'll go over sort of the details of what this means in the process, but basically it means in the rescheduling process, the DEA and HHS and FDA, they finished their component, and through the rulemaking process, they now have to put what's called a proposed rule up for everyone to see, individuals as well as Congress, for public comment. And so this is the what they're proposing. So this is the language currently from the Controlled Substance Act. So the first thing they're saying is remove these sections, specifically marijuana and marijuana extract, to completely remove those from Schedule 1. But as far as tetrahydrocannabinol, they're actually leaving this section in Schedule 1. And this is where there's a lot of interpretation and figuring out, but to amend it. So they're taking out this whole, section as far as these isomer descriptions. And they added, a line that this does not include tetrahydrocannabinols that come from the definition of marijuana. And I have that definition here for a second. So this is, there's a lot in here, and that's partially what you're going to see a lot of people pontificating of what this means. There's sort of a rule of game as far as politics go, that, you kind of fake it till you make it, as far as saying, calling everything a win. But really, this is where people are going to be diving in and looking at what every little word means. And I don't know if you want to add something there, Pam, or do you want to just keep going through them?
I think there's a lot that we don't know yet. So it's important to use this as a signpost of the direction of where we're going. And here we're really starting to see the DEA lean harder into what is a tetrahydrocannabinol and separating it out from marijuana and stuff. As you move forward, we'll see what that means. I think when they take tetrahydrocannabinols and they remove the temporary ones, and the fact that they added temporary ones, it is very telling that we're honoring the plant separate and apart from its lesser known and synthetic equivalents.
Yeah, so I think this sort of, and again, this is all sort of happening in the backdrop of, the Farm Bill moving forward. We have, FDA still calling on Congress to create a pathway that they can regulate cannabinoids. You have, several members of Congress, trying to decide what does this look like. So I think what we are going to get from this is sort of at least an idea of what people are thinking. So the other thing it says is to add these sections under Schedule 3. So 1308.13 in the Controlled Substance Act is the heading Schedule 3. And so they've decided to stop using marijuana with an H, looks like. It's pretty exciting. So marijuana is defined in Section 21 of Controlled Substance Act, which we'll look at that definition in a second. Marijuana extract. And so they're specifically, making sure that they're saying that the things that are covered under hemp, which are so well defined, that's a joke, are not a part of the scheduling. But then they added specifically for Schedule 3 that naturally derived Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinols are Schedule 3. So as Pam was saying, they're really removing the sort of synthetic world from the plant. And I think, that's sort of what our messaging is that in a way, the Department of Justice, in their press release, they were touting that, they're calling on rescheduling because of the accepted medical use. And then we're seeing, as we dive in here, really a return to the plant. So I think this document really kind of turns the conversation back to where it all started, and that's with the plant and with patients. And so I also have these little definitions in here that will be helpful. Anything you want to say about these before I move to the next slide, Pam? Okay.
I think it'll become more clear when we work through what the cannabinoids are in the chart as
Yeah.
to how these apply. But I think your point is very well taken with what we're seeing in the Farm Bill, and even this morning, just the initial call out between cannabinoid products and non-cannabinoid products or non-cannabinoid material. This is going to play a big role.
Okay, so these are two sections that they referred to several times within that amendment. So 7 USC 16390 is the definition of hemp. And this was modified through the hemp bill. And so the way it's defined now is, it can be very confusing, but it means that it's the same plant. And it's any part of that plant, including the seeds, all the derivative extracts, cannabinoids, isomers, acids, salts, and salt isomers, whether they're growing or not. So that means it doesn't change definition when you pull it out of the ground. With a concentration of less than 0.3% THC, and that little sentence, there's so much case law basically unpacking each one of those items. And I think what a lot of people are hoping to see is that the new iteration of the hemp bill will clean up some of these definitions. But it's also, Pam and I were on Capitol Hill, and we could tell you it's very political, and it's interesting space because we're not talking about concepts, we're talking about words, right? Like and people using different definitions. So the definition of marijuana, which they also and the definitions there, they have got both with the H and the J. And this actually didn't change from the previous definition. But basically marijuana is that plant and everything that isn't hemp, is what it's saying, or the plant fiber, stalks, oil. This is all sort of what we would consider sort of before the hemp bill, hemp products, right? Before we got into all of the crazy definitions of cannabinoids. And so I'm just going to give you guys a couple little highlights from this, and then we're going to get into really unpacking what the scheduling of the cannabinoids would look like. So, right up front, the Department of Justice says that, that the Schedule 3, it's still a controlled substance act it's still a controlled substance. And any of those existing controls for Schedule 3 products will be in place. So that means unregulated Schedule 3 products, i.e. everything that we're doing in the States, those are still illegal federally. However, the protections that the medical cannabis programs have under the CJS amendment, as long as we keep passing that, will stay in place. And a lot of people don't know this, but there's actually there's nothing legally protecting the adult use market. There's nothing written, expressed from Congress. There's no direction from the Department of Justice. The lack of enforcement of Schedule 1 laws is really at the whim of POTUS, of the President of the United States at this point. They're also the same thing. They kind of bring home the point that this includes the manufacturing, distribution, dispensing, and possession. They would all remain applicable to criminal prohibitions of the CSA. And then this sentence, any drugs containing a substance within the CSA would remain subject to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which we know what they're actually talking about here is actually taking a drug through the drug approval process, which, that is not what we're doing at the state levels. Okay, so Pam and I had a lot of fun making this chart. So Pam, why don't I hand this over to you and let you explain this chart, and just know, this is the DEA or the Department of Justice called for Schedule 3 is not black and white. This is not a simple, we're just going to move this over here. So Pam, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, 100%. So I think laying the groundwork for everybody, it's important to recognize that as we go through the chart, this is relative only to cannabis at the moment, not to hemp, because that's a different and ongoing iterative conversation. So when we look at these primary cannabinoids, right, and we move marijuana all the way to Schedule 3, CBD, obviously, that's where it'll go. I think the biggest question mark I have is around CBN, especially CBN that's in downstream products. There's trace amounts that are a naturally occurring cannabinoid that's not a tetrahydrocannabinol, but what is the process from CBD to CBN? And would it have to go through a process of synthesization, and how that is going to be captured by the DEA? Delta 8, again, in trace amounts of flower, with the way that structure is set up with marijuana versus that marijuana extract. I think you're going to see D8 be an interesting one. Also, it's naturally occurring tetrahydrocannabinol. You've got cannabivarin, which is THCV. So I would say likely that may fit comfortably under Schedule 3, but the devil's in the details, and we really don't have those yet. Delta 9, obviously, we have that called out, and we have that called out in a really important way. Steph mentioned it already, but we're returning to the power of the plant. What is coming naturally occurring in the plant is a really important aspect to this conversation, and it's returning us to where we want to be. It's one of those defining moments that we're going to have as we look as cannabis as the gateway to bringing us back to whole plant medicine, and or a whole plant wellness option. Or not wellness. Steph is teaching me to use the words very carefully. So Steph, do you want to correct me? Because I would like to have proper nomenclature.
Yeah. I think that as we can see, in anything when you're talking about legislation, words matter. And I think as we were working on medical cannabis, we use the word medical in a very intentional way. And, part of our struggle for safe access to medical cannabis, there you can really see it as sort of two major battles. One is a legal battle that's had to do with the propaganda and prohibition of the cannabis plant. And the other struggle is actually looking at how this country defines medicine. And right now, the legal term medicine in the United States, it means a FDA approved drug. And so as we're moving forward, we are hoping to redefine medicine and expand that definition of medicine in a way that would include plants. And why I think that, it's important, the term wellness is actually often used as something, from the current perspective, it means non-FDA approved drugs. But what it also means is if we don't fight to change the definition of medicine and have cannabis own that space, is that cannabis is going to remain only a treatment option for the privileged, right? It'll stay separated out of our healthcare infrastructure. It won't be covered by insurance. It won't be taught in medical schools. And so as we're talking about moving cannabis forward as medicine, we're not talking about the pharmaceuticalization of cannabis. We're talking about the expansion of the definition of medicine in this country.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point. So gives us the ability to return to that and hopefully see a plumb line through these constant iterative conversations in the Farm Bill. So I would stay tuned and watch very closely how these conversations parallel track one another as we see how the Farm Bill is going to address cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids from these sort of larger Franken-cannabinoids, which are the back end of this slide, THCO, THCP, THCJD, they would clearly all be staying on Schedule 1. And as we approach banking, as we approach all of this legislation, we're now going to be able to do so, talking about what matters and what ultimately will unify both of these supply chains, driving towards the foundation that we forgot about as we expanded access and bringing that back to the core focus of medical medicine and what is true to the plant. So I hope that that's what this chart provides you with. It also tells you which are naturally occurring phytocannabinoids, whether or not they can be converted from base material, and how potentially intoxicating they are in strength to Delta-9. Now, remember, the reason why focusing back on what the plant naturally produces is important. We have safety data, we have analytical data. We also understand generally how these primary cannabinoids that the plant produces will affect the average person. The further away we get from there and the more chemical process that we're doing to chemically alter the structure of that base cannabinoid, it can affect people very differently. And that will have significant implications for the consumer. So if we can also use this as an opportunity to drive patient and consumer awareness and the responsibility that the legislators and the regulators have to provide that information on packages and ensure quality control and safety.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that, again, nothing with cannabis is simple, right? And I think that one of the challenges for patient education and doctor education on the products that are currently available in the United States, whether from the hemp-derived market or even from the regulated or unregulated cannabis markets, is that many of the so THC delta 8, it does exist in trace amounts naturally, right? And so that, like, if it's what's happening with the plant is that the cannabinoids that are naturally occurring there. So if somebody breeds a plant that has a higher level of THC delta 8, that would be under Schedule 3. I think what we're seeing the DEA try to unpack is addressing these semi-synthetics are these concentrations that don't have a safety profile. Now, it doesn't mean that we know that they're unsafe, but the truth is we don't have any data on what happens to a human that takes large amounts of these cannabinoids. And there is, a process improving safety. And what we've seen in sort of the loopholes within the hemp bill, and honestly, just sort of creativity under prohibition. I mean, honestly, that's sort of how we all got here, was a lot of creativity under prohibition. But you saw, people really lean into, these definitions of cannabinoids and bring them to market, basically utilizing those loopholes, not necessarily thinking of product safety. So we can come back to this chart because I think we'll be referring to it, but I'm gonna go ahead and just take us through the next few slides. And then I just want to make sure we leave lots of times for questions. Okay, so the other thing that's really clear about this is like the DEA is not, singing the tune of medical cannabis. So when you read through the filing of the Department of Justice, in almost every sort of section of looking at the rescheduling process, the DEA has comments that tells me that they want a administrative hearing. And so I think if they don't get sort of these answers through public comments, which is a 60-day period for that, and I'll talk about that in just a second, that they're sort of gearing up for public hearings. So, literally every single point, DEA is like, well, I think there could be more information on that. And I'm not kidding, like literally every single thing. They're like, and I want to see more information. So what the DEA, I think, is lining up in their comments is if somebody in the public comment says, I think we need a hearing to look at the data around emergency room visits, then I think the DEA is going to be like, okay, yeah, we need a hearing. And I'll tell you guys a little bit what that will mean after the process. But yeah, I'm not kidding. Like literally every single thing, DEA is like, I think we need more information. But what we also see in the documents, both from Department of Justice's, their interpretation, as well as legal determinations from the OMB, the key pieces are that we definitely have the I'm gonna skip around it real quick. So the one thing that was definitely confirmed is that under our obligations under the UN single treaty and the current scheduling of cannabis at the UN level, that the US can move forward with rescheduling. So this, and I've done like 2-hour seminars on the relationship between the UN single treaties and the Controlled Substance Act. But the only reason we have the Controlled Substance Act is because of the UN single treaties. And so, that's why there's so much deference paid to the UN single treaties. And it's also why we would not be able to reschedule medical cannabis in the United States if we hadn't spent the time to reschedule cannabis at the UN level. The other question that the DEA was really looking at is what their powers are as far as having to follow the HHS's recommendations. Let me go back here. And what the courts have said is that basically the DEA has to follow, is bound to HHS's findings up until the proposed rule, which is where we are right now. And then as we move forward, the DEA has to still pay a lot of deference to what HHS has said, but they can actually, they don't have to move forward with the Schedule 3 recommendation. And so I'm just gonna jump for a second into the process. So because this was initiated by executive order, there's a little bit more review that's going to happen through this process of the impact of this rule change. But there will be public comment. There's time for judicial review, which we know that a lot of people are going to be suing. And really the language within the rule, the proposed rule, it sounds like they're anticipating litigation. And so sorry, I needed to move the you are here. So we're actually here where it says proposed rule. And so this is a proposed rule, not a final rule. And so what that means is there is a 60-day public comment period that starts when it actually shows up on the public registry. And I'm not sure, Pam, if it's showed up today. It was not there in the wee hours of the night yet.
Very early in the morning, but real-time live updates, I will check now. Still no marijuana documents on the Federal Register.
Yeah, so it's just it's an administrative component. Makes me feel good. It takes me a minute to get the website updated. So apparently it does for the DEA also. So as soon as that shows up in the Federal Registry, then the public comment period starts. And I'll show you the instructions for that. And there's a lot of reasons why people may want to do public comment. There may be a lot of reasons why you don't want to, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then once that 60-day period is over, the DEA will decide, first of all, they have to respond to every single comment. And at that time, they can decide, we want to have an administrative hearing. And that process is a little opaque because it is actually done through an administrative law judge. So it's like it's an internal process. So it's a DEA appointed judge who listens to information and then it gives them advice. The determination that comes out of that hearing is non-binding. So what we experienced the last time there was a administrative hearing on cannabis was in 1985. The hearing took 3 years. And actually, the administrative law judge, Judge Young, actually came out and said that cannabis shouldn't even be on the schedule, that it was actually safer than potatoes. And the DEA decided to ignore that. So it's really just sort of a very expensive internal process. And cannabis will stay in Schedule 1 during the public comment, during any sort of administrative hearing. And then once that process once the final ruling is made, people will have I believe it's 30 to 60 days to file a lawsuit, right, to challenge the findings. And I know currently of at least 5 organizations that are gearing up to sue based on either the process that happened or some of the findings. And so, this is just sort of the list here of the other the processes that will come into play. But this, a lot of people have asked me what happens if there's a new president. And actually, because this is an executive order, it can be modified or revoked, but there would have to be a public comment period if we get to the final rule under let's say if Biden continues president, then this will continue to carry out with those recommendations. If there's a new leadership in the president's office, they could pull this process. They can't just simply, just like with the pen and paper, just override this particular executive order. But they can basically start a public comment period, a notification with their intention to revoke it.
Steph, I think that one of the things that's important to recognize, and I know people hear lawsuits and litigation and how protracted that is, what that means from a positive pressure standpoint to Congress. Yes, we should all, I see it in chat, we should all be paying actively attention to rescheduling, participating strategically with really important comments, and being sure that the comments that we're making cannot be retooled or weaponized by the other side in this process. But more than that, it's a time to refocus back to Congress, because there were 2 congressional service reports, and I can post them in the chat, that were issued this week that remind Congress that there's both a legislative way to handle this and the process that we're currently in now. So at any point in time, Congress can come and say that we have comfortable warm water, or I like to think of it as positive pressure, and take an action to move us closer towards Schedule 6 and investing in medical as a basis for that and setting up a framework. They have that ability. And we have seen through the work of ASA and the incredible work of Steph that medical cannabis moves the ball forward. And it cannot be understated that in this process, as much as it is important to pay attention to rescheduling and invest in that, this is not the time at all to take the foot off the gas and push for something that is akin to descheduling and the commitment of Congress, because regardless of what happens at the end of that lawsuit and we can get rescheduling, Congress will still need to act. So reminding them and leaning in to the environment that they have in order to address this more proactively, it's going to be really important, especially heading into an unknown election season. It also highlights for us that this election season, for the first time, there will be very positive and acute conversations around cannabis.
Thank you for that. And something I'm always pointing out to folks is that, in the last few major election cycles, like in 2020 and 2022, even though, there's supposedly this large amount of support for cannabis, candidates for both parties didn't feel like they needed to take a stance. And so I'm actually going to be talking to folks about some campaigns that we're going to be doing for focusing on the election, because it's really when you have people's ears. But yeah, I mean, no matter what happens through that process, the end of the day, like, it doesn't do anything to our current access, right? Like, we need Congress to act. And what has changed, though, again, and even, the Department of Justice, reiterated this, like, nothing changes as far as these current programs. And there's a lot of myths out there that as soon as it becomes Schedule 3, then all of a sudden the only legal cannabis would have to be prescribed, and then all of the state cannabis would have to go through that process. And so I just want to also just let people know, a lot of people are like, because this is finally moving, a lot of people that don't really understand the process of what we've been doing with the state experiments are weighing in. So you'll see a lot of sort of doctors, talking to the media, say, under their understanding of Schedule 3, and they're correct. A legal Schedule 3 product, is a prescription, and that's what they understand. But what they don't understand is that the whole state experiment, we had to step outside of the Controlled Substance Act because it was not meeting the needs of patients. And, whether that's Schedule 1, Schedule 3, Schedule 4, our current access is completely outside of that process. So, this is a time for education. Don't, you'll see so much of this media, you might question yourself, but really, this is really just a time that we can finally have a conversation about cannabis having accepted medical use. So no matter what happens through the rescheduling process that's happening, FDA, HHS, and the Department of Justice, maybe not the DEA, the Department of Justice, agree that cannabis has currently accepted medical use and treatment for the United States. So cannabis is not going back into Schedule 1. That is for sure. And as far as, our work as patient advocates, we can kind of shed this approach where we imagine, like, you don't have to prove that cannabis has medical use. We just now get to talk about how we get cannabis to patients. And so, I'm just going to run through a bunch of slides really quickly. And again, this will be available. And this presentation is going to be available in a little bit of a different format for folks. But the reason this happened was because of the work you guys have been doing and passing these state laws, right? This accepted medical use has come from the experience of doctors and patients actually using cannabis. And then we also, our sort of playbook, our blueprint of the work we've been doing over the years was really informed by some of the past denials. So that led us to efforts to create product safety protocols for cannabis for human consumption. to change the UN scheduling, to, remove barriers for research, which we did through regulatory channels and administrative channels for years, and then finally solidified in the Research Act. We have all of these sort of mainstream institutions coming in, stepping in, saying, they want to see medical cannabis, and they're compelled to have to address cannabis in their sector of the healthcare industry. So what it does, Schedule 3, it could potentially remove stigma, and maybe even some legal grounds. It means at least you can have a conversation with your friends, your family, your doctor, maybe even your employer about medicine. It means that when you're talking to Congress, we can actually start talking about how to get cannabis to patients. But it doesn't, this does not address all of these lawsuits that have happened, in this sort of weird space of the lack of federal regulations. It doesn't address, the FDA's, call for a new pathway to regulate cannabis. It doesn't deal with these state issues of, the states trying to regulate the synthetic cannabinoids and other cannabinoid products. It doesn't deal with these issues that are important to patients, right? This is what patients are fighting for. It doesn't address the fact that adult use programs are pushing patients to the side, and slowly things are getting worse for patients. It doesn't address the issues as far as federal employees, veterans. It doesn't address issues of patients being able to travel. And so, as Pam said, like, this is, Congress is key, right? This is still where things have to happen. And we know that FDA would like to see cannabis go through, like you said, this definition of medicine, to go through a FDA drug approval process. And right now, the only way to get into that door to take advantage of the healthcare infrastructure, like insurance and being able to utilize cannabis treatments in a hospital and hospice, right now is stuck with within the sort of FDA approval. And we know FDA is trying to get ahead of this. They have created this cannabis product committee. Basically, it's just a way to tell Congress they've got it taken care of, and they want the power to oversee cannabis. And the FDA is telling people that they want to see cannabis medicines go through the botanical drug development process. They're also saying, there's a ton of IND applications, for cannabis medicines, but something that the DOJ pointed out in their findings is that there's no pipeline for a cannabis medicine. And that's because this process, the botanical process, it basically is also created for single compound products. So since 2004, since this botanical drug process has been available, only 2 drugs have made it through that process, and both of them are single compound extractions. So, this brings us back to what Pam was saying, like we have a plan, right? We know what we want. We want to see an Office of Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoid Control in HHS, not FDA. And we want to see a new schedule for cannabis, one that does not have the baggage of the criminal penalties in the Controlled Substance Act, but instead is a pathway to move cannabis into the healthcare systems. So I'm just going to show you quickly these slides, just so you know that this is all available on our website. So this is very well thought out. If you want to see sort of what Schedule 6 would mean, again, this is on our website. All of these agencies need to be told how to address patients and our medicine. And we need a regulatory structure that will allow these cannabis products to move into a regulated system so that a patient can access cannabis wherever they are in the United States. And, we can get the products we need. So if you want to see a copy of this legislation, it's on our, you can find it on our website under the Safe Access for All campaign. But there's no, we're going to hear a lot of pontificating. What does this mean? Everyone has a dog in a fight, and they're going to say that rescheduling means this. But no matter what, we don't need a crystal ball. Congress is going to have to act, and POTUS is going to play a big part in what this rescheduling means. And with a election coming up, and again, I'm just going to plow through here. Your voice really matters, and so we are launching a campaign called the Compassionate Candidate. We have tools for you to interact with your representatives. Everyone's member of Congress is up for election this year, and a third of your senators are up for election. And this is a perfect time to get them on the record saying that they're going to address these issues. That's how we just push through. The other thing is that a lot of people are saying that rescheduling fixes everything. This is a dangerous message, right? We know that if Congress thinks that that POTUS or that the executive branch is taking care of something, like what we saw when Obama was elected, and we saw the Department of Justice, Cole memo that saying to stop the raids. Well, it didn't actually stop the raids, and in fact, there were more raids under Obama than any of the other presidents. But we could not get Congress to introduce the CJS amendment for 4 years because they thought that the executive branch had it taken care of. And so we had to educate Congress. We had to do, the Vote Medical Marijuana campaign where we were, running attack ads and really getting Congress to see what was happening to patients. And then ultimately, 5 years later, we were able to pass the CJS amendment. So again, I think we just have to be mindful that the rescheduling process isn't definitive. And I think what Pam said and what we're really wanting people to know at Americans for Safe Access is that nothing moves forward for medical cannabis without Congress. And so the other thing I just wanted to say that's in the findings is actually instructions on public comment. But as Pam said, I think we really need to be mindful about what goes into public comment, right? So we're not going to be your public comments. You can't refer or respond to other public comments, right? And part of the sort of strategy that we're looking at is whether or not Americans for Safe Access is going to even make any public comments is, are we going to be helping the DEA in their efforts to undermine these findings, or are we putting out more fodder for lawsuits? And so because we know that in a way, we've already gotten what we wanted from this rescheduling process, right? We have the recognition from HHS and the Department of Justice that cannabis has accepted medical value. And now the rest is really up to us. Okay, so with that in mind, I think we can take some questions. Amy,
Sure, we have a couple questions here. One of the things that was asked that you just were talking about how we're not sure whether we actually are reinforcing the DEA's mission in the public comment period. I did have a question about getting help with crafting the public comments. Can we shift that into what would your recommendation be for messaging?
Yeah, I think that so we just got this document last night. This is the first analysis I wanted to do was just to, sorry, I don't want to make anyone dizzy. I just want to get back to these slides. So pardon my flipping. So I think we're going to be putting out a little bit more information about, where we see a need for public comment. My initial reaction right now is that when I'm looking at what is being challenged, like you can really tell sort of what the DEA is hoping will be challenged. I didn't see a direct place where I was like, wow, we really need to enter public comment here. And so I think that I would say stay tuned, right? And I think that as we're going through and doing deeper analysis into this, we may uncover like, oh wow, we really need this very specific thing from patients or from medical professionals, or we really need help putting together this data set. But as far as like I mean, I was joking around that my public comments was just going to be like the picture of the thumbs up from direct messaging. But right, like, yes, okay, great. It has accepted medical value. But the truth was, no matter how this process was going to unfold, we knew that we were not going to get what we wanted from this rescheduling process, that we really need Congress to step in and define this. And so one thing that we're always very mindful of at Americans for Safe Access is the time and energy of our members and volunteers. And if you had 30 minutes this week to do something around medical cannabis, I would say talk to your member of Congress about what scheduling means and doesn't mean, most importantly, than trying to craft a response in public comment. So I think you're going to see a lot of focus from us on Congress. We're also there's some potential legal challenges. I don't want to show my cards right now, but there's a lot of other sort of possibilities that this framework changes. A lot of sort of old questions we can bring back to the table as far as it concerns, as far as patients and patients' rights. But right now, really, like, if you have not called your member of Congress and said, hey, the scheduling is not going to do anything for me, I still need you to introduce comprehensive legislation. They need to hear from you. And I'll also say, I've been on Capitol Hill the last couple of weeks, and we'll be spending a lot more time on Capitol Hill. But the big takeaway that I have from meeting with offices is that, one, a lot of the sort of supportive of cannabis generally, members of Congress, because they're not hearing from patients, they think that that by supporting adult use federal legislation, that's how they can support patients. And they don't understand that patients aren't getting what we need from the adult use programs in the states, and they just really need to hear from patients. And we have all sorts of tools to help you with those actions. Today you can go to our Take Action section and just send an email to your members that say, please make the rescheduling conversation count for patients.
So
And-
just an FYI, Steph, I've
Yep.
dropped into the chat here the link to the Take Action page where you can send a letter to your reps and sign the petition and more. There's also the link to the Compassionate Candidate, where you can go and sign up for committing to the Compassionate Candidate campaign and sign up for some volunteer activities.
And I wanted to echo this statement. I'm on the Hill, and I think it's really important for them to put a face to what you're asking them to do, for them to recognize the impact, the positive impact that marijuana and cannabinoids have had in everyday people's lives. And it's important to do that both here on the Hill and really at home in the district. And I think since COVID, we've seen a real shift to anchor back to what stakeholders at home need. And members are oftentimes at home as often as they are here on the Hill. So it cannot be underestimated. I know everybody doesn't have the luxury to be able to come to DC, but you don't have to be in DC to have an impact in DC. I think, being part of ASA, you're always represented zealously and with care and attention most don't get. But you can really make an impact at home, especially in states where there maybe is some cognitive dissonance. They have either an illicit market or they have an intoxicating hemp market, and they don't understand the impact that has on medical marijuana and the access that you would need there, or the impact that you have that it may affect your ability to, if you are a medical marijuana patient and you work in the industry, the regulated industry, that could impact how you get a house or your bank account or your healthcare or any of these other things, or how expensive it is to get high quality medical cannabis versus a card carrying member of a prescription program. Those things are all really important. And it's easy for me or Steph or anybody to say them. It has such a different impact. It lands so differently when it comes from the authenticness of somebody who's actually been there and is living it and is a stakeholder and is asking for their representatives to show up for them. So I think as we navigate what comments should go in, as we understand more of the process, you can be a steward of this without a consequence by going to your members both in DC and in the district. So I don't want you to feel like you have to wait or be scared of the comment process. There are actively things that you can do that fall outside of that, but will have just as big of an impact. And
Yeah.
supporting efforts like ASA and the comments that they will make or other relative associations, but certainly in ASA.
Yeah, no, and like I said, moving forward, like we just really wanted to have a response, right away for folks. I think, there's a lot of misinformation, so we just wanted to host this today, just kind of give this who, what, when, where, what's happening. But the other sort of takeaway I have from members of Congress is that unlike when I first started working on medical cannabis in 2002, people's opinions about medical cannabis are not set in stone, right? Like members of Congress actually have more of a question than a strong position, right? So when I first started, we had a lot of really, strong opponents that were really organizing against us. I think our biggest enemy now is that they're not getting information, right? And so, they're, there's a lot to be said about the power of lobbyists and the power of big money in politics. But at the end of the day, you have to remember the member of Congress has a million different things on their desk that they're having to address, right? Just like look at the news for a day that they're having to wade through. And their job isn't to come to DC and defend all of the laws in their state. Their job is to represent their constituents. So if they're not hearing from you, if they're not hearing medical cannabis is really important, then they're going to put learning about it aside, right? There's no reason that they have to really understand all the nuances of it, right? So that's where you come in, and it really matters. Like, members of Congress take, the impact of what a constituent is saying. It means more to them than a paid lobbyist. But if there isn't anyone there and they need to have like a one pager on what cannabis means, sure, they're going to take the one pager that a lobbyist left, right? It's not some evil conspiracy, it's convenience. And so right now, we really need a commitment from, to ourselves that we're going to make every effort that we have, both in this upcoming election, but just in, sort of our day-to-day advocacy, that, the first question you should ask anyone is, have you talked to your member of Congress about medical cannabis? And literally, you'll find that as soon as you start making, having a conversation, they're going to come to you and ask you questions about medical cannabis when they come up, because they don't have the knowledge that you do. And so during the election, like, your members are going to be home more than ever. They're going to be in public. They're going to be at town halls. They're going to be doing campaign stops. And within our compassionate candidate campaign, we're going to have a toolkit to help you, interact with candidates on the campaign trail, and really, make sure that the next elected Congress, the 119th Congress, is coming to DC with a mandate from patients in their state to create safe access once and for all here in DC. But I will tell you that the only reason it's not going to happen is if we don't ask, right? The members' offices, they don't, again, they're not, no one in DC is against medical cannabis for the most part. I would say it's a very small minority. Our biggest enemy is the lack of action. And I know over the last few years, patients have felt derailed and pushed aside. A lot of the conversations you see in the press and the legislative proposals have been about adult use, so you feel like it's not about you. But we have power. You have power to change that. We just have to make some noise. Nothing happens in DC because it's the right thing to do, right? It only happens from people pushing and, let's say it's been a long ride. When I founded Americans for Safe Access as a cocky 25-year-old, I thought this whole thing was going to take 2 years. So I get like this is a marathon. Everyone's been working at this for a long time. But this today, this finding from HHS, this is what we've been working for, right? And the Department of Justice, their proposed rules is about patients. It's about the plant. So all these conversations that you felt like are not about you, the synthetics, like regulating these markets, the Department of Justice and HHS have put the spotlight back on us. And so take a bow and start directing, because your members need to hear from you and they want to hear from you to know what to do. I think we're coming up on the hour. Do we have one more question, Amy?
Let me see. I think that the last question was really about the FDA scheduling. It said FDA HHS created a new standard for currently accepted medical use to get around the FDA new drug approval standards. And it seems likely that that will be a target of litigation by SAM and other opponents. What are the precedents for the FDA changing standards like this?
Yeah, so I will say, the five, so that we're talking about is referred to as Camus, is basically a standard that actually was created by the DEA in the first place. So there's a lot of precedent, right? So that standard, the 5-point standard, that was created, and it actually came out of a rescheduling petition, one of the first ones, was that was basically these 5 standards to show that something has accepted medical use. And the 5, so DEA applied these 5 standards that they made up, right? And applied, and there was a lawsuit, and a district court found that the DEA could apply that additional 5 standards. And so what HHS has said is like, look, and you'll, as you read through this, it's pretty interesting because you have both comments from the Department of Justice as well as from legal counsel that says, and they're finally saying what we've said all along is, the rescheduling process as it was imagined, right, with the Controlled Substance Act was not designed for a product to move out of Schedule 1, right? Like it was designed more for rescheduling to move something from like 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, right? And the very nature of the language, right, of that 5 the 5 levels of proving accepted medical use was really based on a drug approval process. So what the Department of Justice has said here in backing up HHS's approach to this 2-step perimeter is that actually HHS was just addressing this elephant in the room, which is the way that the Controlled Substance Act was written was that a product could not move out of Schedule 1. And the reality that faces us today in the United States, the real world application of accepted medical use is broader than the FDA approval process. And the way that HHS and FDA and Department of Justice and even DEA has to look at that is actually because of the work we've been doing in the States, right? So, a lot of what HHS found and the work that ASA did to help with that definition of accepted medical use has happened through, state programs doing evaluations of what has accepted medical use. It's through, doctors, over 6 million patients, being legally registered. And you'll really see a lot of the DEA's comments in there, challenging that. It really sounds like they are stuck in Reagan's drug war, right? Like they're like, part of me was wondering, like, did you read these comments aloud, DEA? Because it's like they're really still in this very different space. And so yes, Sam is definitely going to legally challenge that. But as Pam said, and I just want to remind folks, is that this whole rescheduling process is it's an opportunity, right? Because at every little step, there's going to be media coverage and people are going to be like, what does this mean? And so there's an opportunity to educate that like, it doesn't mean much. It means that we need Congress to act. And so, we will be keeping you up to date as things, as there are milestones. And again, as we are, diving deeper into these strategies, if we see a important role for public comment, we'll definitely be putting that out to our members. But right now we are laser focused on Congress. If you're not familiar with our legislative proposal, you can go to the Safe Access for All campaign page under the advocacy section. We have toolkits for making presentations on the legislation, talking points, the full draft of the legislation, outreach kits for you to speak at public forums. So and you'll also over the next upcoming months, we'll be doing a lot of events to help patients and patient advocates be able to engage in these campaigns. Okay, well, I just want to, Pam, I want to say thank you so much, both for working with me last night to unpack what this lovely next phase is. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Pam, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So I forgot one thing that I just wanted to create a little bit of space to talk about, and that is, we were talking a lot about cannabinoids, but I'm wondering if you could I know people are really concerned about terpenes and about, the future of those. We know that terpenes they play an important medical role, but also they're, as far as extractions and vaporized products, they're really potentially a very safe product. And I'm just wondering where terpenes are playing out in all of this. And
Well, I think terpenes are a great example of what you said at the top. Words matter and placement matters. And I think as we look at this plant that is often judged by or regulated by a sum of a part of the plant, terpenes fall into that. We really, at this point, looking at the Farm Bill language, there's no real home. There's no real regulation for them. They come from the flowering tops of the plant, and therefore they kind of get muddled in that conversation around cannabinoids. So as we are looking at the medical benefits, the vaporization of these products, having all cannabis products is important. And this is about packaging and labeling and safety exercises. We at Terpene Belt do a lot to ensure that we are providing the highest quality raw input that is an all cannabis input. We believe that if you're putting cannabis sativa L-terpenes, either from hemp or cannabis, back into cannabinoid products, that is an ingredient. You're source to source. That should matter. And as a consumer, as a patient myself, that matters to me. And we will continue to drive that conversation to ensure that as there are medical studies, we worked with Dr. Sherer at the University of Arizona to run the study around terpenes and their positive benefit with pain relief from burns on skin. And he had a really difficult time first securing them. He had to secure isolates. That's not the same thing, right? When we're talking about full plant medicine, that applies also to terpenes. And so we had to work diligently in order to get him terpenes that should relatively be easy to get, right? If they're sourced from hemp, they should be federally legal. There are still impediments. So know that marijuana and cannabinoids are really important. And Steph, thank you for the space to share that. The conversation doesn't end there. It's important that we ensure everything that this plant is able to do. And the sooner that we can divide and focus and have this Schedule 6 and have this opportunity to have an Office of Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoids, that means we can look at the entire plant in its both isolation and how those things come together. So stay tuned. I think it's also important to remember that if you enjoy a cannabis flavored product, that fight is not over. From an inhalable product standpoint, I would contend that the product form factor that is most prone to a negative federal regulation would be inhalable products.
Yeah, this is really the beginning of, and you know, you look at, you know, again, this is where patients really have to become experts about adulterants and additives and what are in those products. And you know, I think we're all fighting for a day that you can actually just take your medicine without having to understand the nuances of every of every regulation, and that is what we're fighting towards. So but again, I'm gonna let people go. I know we ran over 10 minutes, but stay tuned. And again, if you guys are not signed up with American Safe Access, please do. We'll continue to send updates. And you know, we need some gas in our tank more than ever so that we can continue to represent patients here on Capitol Hill, but also unfold these very important campaigns. So if you're not a member yet, become one, and I will see you guys soon. Thanks so much.